What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Aubrey Sitterson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate you inviting me on,
I
man.
am so happy to talk to you. You have a new comic from Image Comics coming out called Free Planet. We're going to dive into all things that. But I'd be remiss if we didn't mention that you're also comic creator of the comic book story of professional wrestling, which is so stinking good. If you are a professional wrestling fan and you haven't read that,
You're missing out,
dang,
man. You're sleeping on the
it's
job is what you're doing.
It's so good. It's one that I recommend on everything. Also wrote The Worst Dudes. But how I actually discovered you was through this little gem, Beef Bros.
Beef Bros, hell yeah. I love
Oh,
that.
so good. So, like I said, I want to talk to you all things about Free Planet and kind of, dig into this new world that you've created. I always like to ask and kind of figure out though, how did you get into comics? Did you always have a love for comics growing up, or is this something that came later in life for you?
Yeah, I adored comics ever since I was a little boy, and it started with newspaper strips. I didn't have proximity to a comic shop when I was growing up, and we lived in exurbs and like old farmland and stuff. So, it was hard. It was hard getting to shops, and I adored strips. My grandfather, we moved around quite a bit, and my grandfather used to, because as a kid, it blew my mind. There's time we moved, and I realized, oh, in different cities, they have different newspaper strips in their comic sections. And so my grandfather started sending me care packages of the Richmond, Virginia, the Richmond Times-Dispatch comics page, Sunday Funnies. But no, that was the start. And then as I got a little older, I really fell in love with Tintin
Okay.
specifically, just because it was available in the library,
Yeah.
right? There weren't, it's not like these days where you can just get the LA Public Li I live in LA now. The LA Public Library is bonkers for comics fans. But yeah, no, and just being able to check out comics from the library was mind blowing. And then, what really kind of kicked things into overdrive, though, was when I arrived in New York City at 18 years of age for college, and all of a sudden found myself s- with just in a city with a higher comic shop per square mile density that I think
Yeah.
exists anywhere. There were so many amazing comic shops, and it was really easy for me to just fall directly down the rabbit hole.
Oh,
And in terms of, superhero stuff, of course, but French comics, Japanese comics, everything, like was it was so easy because it was all just at my fingertips there.
yeah, I think a lot of us kind of got into it of comic strips were kind of a gateway for a lot of us in the comics. Were there a couple that stood out for you of like these were your go-to strips, comic strips?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my number one with a bullet was Outland, which led me to, so I kind of skipped a thing too, right? So I read strips, but I would read in the comic book funny pages, but also I would get the collections from Walden
Yeah.
Books and Mall, and reading Outland by Burke Breathed led me back to Bloom County, which was his
Okay.
previous and even more, I think, kind of influential and popular series. And it's funny, I still have all my old Bloom County and Outland collections, and I pull them out and go through them every once in a while. And it's a hoot because Bloom County specifically was really, really political, and it was set, it was coming out during the 80s, and it was hyper specific in terms of the political content. And as a kid, I didn't get any of that. All that went directly over my head. I was just like, oh, it's a penguin and a rabbit and is a groundhog, I think he is. I'm not sure. But it was funny it was just
Yeah.
silly looking, and I liked the way it looked and like the structures of the gags. But now every time I go back and reread any of it, I find it even more hysterically funny because I've learned enough about 80s political history to actually get most of the jokes now.
And now it sinks in. So
Yeah, like I know who Casper Weinberger is now,
right.
right? Which is like, and I bring that up because Casper Weinberger is the a integral component of the punchline of kind of a shocking number of Bloom County gags over the course of the years. But yeah, no, and that stuff as a kid, I just thought that was a funny name, and it is. It
It
is a
is.
funny
It
name,
is so funny name, but it
but it's
works.
also a real person.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're at the point then for you of, falling into this love, this medium of comics. Did you say, okay, I want to start to create and dip my toe into creating comics?
It was soon after really falling down the rabbit hole of comics fandom when I was in college because, I arrived fully expecting to make my career in academia. I
Mm,
wanted to be a professor.
okay.
I wanted to be a philosophy professor. That was my dream. And within the first semester of college, I realized that's absolutely not what I want to do. And I think it has a lot to do with having met a bunch of professors and just seeing how miserable they are and like hearing just like snippets of like the political backbiting and like how brutally contentious it all is, which is funny that I ended up in comics and light of that. But no, so I needed to find the new thing, and one of the things that really appealed to me about comics was, I had always a lot of people come to comics, I talk about people's like home base in terms of like the media that they consume, and a lot of people, writers and artists alike, come to comics as movie and television fans, and that was never really me. I like movies and TV, okay, but I was more of a novel kid. Like that was my primary
Mm,
story delivery mechanism. And the thing that appealed to me about comics was it was an opportunity to work in a visual medium,
yeah.
right? To provide the blueprints for a piece of visual art that's still capable of doing all the things that I love about great novels in terms of, especially like the presentation of complexity and ambiguity and thematic depth and rumination. And the uh, that was like a lightning bolt that struck me. I was like, oh, this is the thing. This is something that I could do, and I kind of rearranged my life around
Yeah.
around doing just that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've talked about this on the show a lot before with creators, and I think one of the things about the medium of comics that I love so much is, it's a visual medium, but you also get to dictate the pace that you consume it in, right? Like where if you want to stay on a double page splash page for as long as you want to just soak it in, no director saying, okay, the movie clip's going farther. Like you can just sit there and just take it all in and in that glory. And I think that's a type of medium that we just don't get that through other aspects.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's unique. It's a cool medium, right?
Yeah.
The medium is the message, Marshall McLuhan, like that whole thing. And I think about that a lot, and that informs a lot of our, like much of our approach on Free Planet specifically, right? This idea of getting people to slow down and giving them something to chew on. And, those are the comics that, I don't know, that's not necessarily true. I like all kinds of comics, right? I love, like one of my favorite comics of all time is Slam Dunk and, the basketball manga, and you just grind through it, you blast through it,
Yeah.
right? Like you read it really, really quickly because it's how it's designed to be, it's how it's drawn and how it's organized. But that's just one option. That's just one way to go about it. And, if your goal is to do if your goal is to do literary comics, right, as opposed to cinematic comics, which I think is often a goal of a lot of my contemporaries. If your goal is to do literary comics, it behooves you to find ways to really slow people down. So no, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Where was it in the process, that you started to get your foot in the door of then actually getting to create comics, getting to tell the stories you wanted to tell?
Well, I mean, getting my foot in the door with comics and having a chance to create the stories I want to tell are kind of two different things, right? Like I started my career as an editor at Marvel,
Mm,
and that came about because I was an intern.
okay.
I got an internship while I was still in college, and they hired me part-time while I was still in college. And then upon graduating, I lucked out that there was a position opening up, and I was able to slide into that an editorial role. So that was my entry into
Yeah.
comics.
Yeah.
It wasn't until much later that I had the opportunity to start telling the types of stories that I want to tell, man. It was a slog,
Yeah.
quite honestly, because working as an editor anywhere, especially somewhere like Marvel that is part of a larger organization and has this long history. And, this isn't a knock against Marvel or Big Two or licensed comics or anything, but they have business concerns
Right.
that rank higher in priority than just tell us a good story,
Yeah.
right? Like, of
Yeah.
course, that's part of it, but like it's, that's not the end all be all. So after Marvel, it was a struggle, quite frankly. Um, I couldn't get work at Marvel because of nepotism concerns. I couldn't get work at DC because I was a Marvel guy. I couldn't get work at more indie publishers because I was a big two guy. Like it was very, very difficult. And many, 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 many years ago, when I was working at Marvel, I remember Dan Slott, who also used to be an editor, many, many years before he actually came back to Marvel with
Mm.
She-Hulk. He said something along the lines of, in order for him to break back in as a writer, he had to wait until people had forgotten that he was an editor.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
that that kind of jives with my experience, man. I did bits and pieces here and there, backups, short stories, one shots, pitches out the wazoo, self-published stuff, participating in anthologies, all kinds of things. My first kind of big break, I suppose, was writing the Street Fighter G.I. Joe crossover at IDW. They reached out to me about that because at the time I was doing a very popular wrestling podcast called Straight Shoot, which is what led to the comic book story professional wrestling that you mentioned earlier. My editor at Penguin Random House, he was a Straight Shoot fan. He listened to my podcast, and so he
It's so
called me about doing
good.
that. Yeah, man. But like, the first big break was Street Fighter G.I. Joe, which then led to my G.I. Joe run at IDW. But even then, I love that work and I'm proud of it, but it's not exactly telling the stories that
Right.
I wanted to tell, right? I was telling G.I. Joe stories set within a Hasbro universe that they were building with specific editorial
Right.
mandates. And it was only later, really, it was No One Left to Fight in 2019, the first No One Left to Fight series, which, came after my G.I. Joe run and all that stuff. And that was the start of my creator-owned
Yeah.
kind of run of comics.
And you've had a great run of creator-owned books. Like
Well,
I said,
thanks,
I've been a
man.
big fan of your work since then. So I want to hop into Free Planet because
Yes, sir.
uh, you know, it is, I got to preview issue one. Holy buckets, talking about an expansive world that you both, you all, your team has created there. Like, if someone hasn't gotten to check it out yet, what is your elevator pitch for Free Planet?
I've been practicing, man. I'm
Let's
ready.
do it. Let's do it.
Free Planet is geopolitical space opera. It is about the first completely free planet in human history. They've just won their revolution after a brutal revolutionary war fought against a massive corporate dominated oligarchy with tendrils stretching out throughout the galaxy. Their planet is the only place that you can find a uniquely potent energy source, which has guaranteed their freedom, but also made them a target of multiple galactic superpowers. The only people defending the planet are the Freedom Guard, group of revolutionary heroes. They all fought in the war. They're all deeply committed to the dream of a free planet. But, Greg, just like everybody in this great nation of ours, they all have completely different ideas about what complete freedom actually entails. And that's what drives all of the drama, all of the geopolitical maneuvering, all of the big sci-fi military action, and of course, all of the heated interpersonal drama between these characters, arguing and trying to figure out how to move forward despite all their differences.
Uh, Gang, I mean, I could end the interview right there. Like, because if that doesn't sell
That's
you,
the
I don't know.
pitch.
I don't know.
That's the pitch, man.
Tell me you're a
Yeah,
wrestling fan without telling me you're a wrestling fan because, man, you can cut a promo.
thank you, brother. I've watched a lot of wrestling over the years, so it absorbs. It's an osmosis thing.
Oh, it's so good. Where did this idea for Free Planet kind of start, and where was the catalyst for it?
Uh, you know, the initial idea for Free Planet, and this is something I've been kicking around for a really long time, before even Jen and my previous collaboration with Savage Hearts at Dark Horse. It really started with this idea of sci-fi Venezuela,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
This idea of a nation striving for independence, with a resource that gives them the means to get independence, but also, like I was just saying, makes them a target, right? It gives other nations a reason to deny their independence, right? And, I didn't want to, and that's one of the kind of historical influences on Free Planet. And there are a bunch more. I've done extensive research on this thing. The Spanish Civil War is a
Yeah.
particularly large influence on it. Russian Revolution, Cuban Revolution. But, Venezuela is really the starting point. And, this idea of setting it in space is just because it's more visually interesting,
Yeah.
and B, it's comics, right? Like
Right.
let's get some fucking spaceships in here.
Let's do it.
That's A. And then B, you know, I didn't want to be beholden to real world
Right.
stuff, right? If I'm telling a story, if I'd said it in the Spanish Civil War and the narrative would be benefited from someone different winning a battle than actually won it, well, then it's a problem, right? But the biggest reason, and I think the most impactful thing about making it a sci-fi book, is that it allows us this opportunity for readers to have a blank slate,
Mm.
to come to this stuff without preconceived notions, right? Because no matter where are on the political spectrum, if you're reading stuff about actual history with pretty contentious ideas being fought over, you're going to have some preconceived notions about who you agree with and who you don't. And we didn't want to be hamstrung by that. And it's part and parcel with that kind of literary complexity that I was mentioning earlier. And, you know, Planet is meant to spark rumination, and it's not a direct metaphor. It's You held up Beef Bros earlier, which I adore Beef Bros is a book I'm very passionate about. But Beef Bros is propaganda.
Yeah.
Beef Bros is it's agitprop. It's aggressive propaganda, but it's propaganda, right? It's a
Yeah.
very specific point of view, and we present it to you in as exciting and exhilarating a fashion as possible. But it's not complex the same way that Free Planet is. And Free Planet's also not a direct metaphor. It was important to us that Free Planet not just be a riddle for someone to figure out and say, oh, well, okay, that's the US and that's China. And, and now
Right.
I understand the message, right? That's the trap that a lot of political comics fall into. We wanted to be able to abstract away from real world like opinions about things,
Mhm.
but while keeping it rooted in historical realities to bring that kind of verisimilitude to
Yeah.
it.
No, I think that's a beautiful idea because, like you said, we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from, different, you know, life situations. And so we all have our preconceived notions. And so if you can kind of take those away and just let us experience it, yeah, our own preconceived notions are still going to influence who we think and who we
Of
side,
course,
but there's not going to be literally like, oh, well, this is a representation of this and this is this.
that's
So
exactly right.
I think it's a smart way to approach it. So that way, hopefully, you as a reader then can just enjoy the story for what it is and really wrestle with it. I think,
That's
and
the hopes, man.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's so good. One of the things I noticed too, is in this first issue, you pack in a lot of stuff, but it isn't in a way that feels overbearing. Like you have a lot of these almost like word bubbles, but they look like almost case files, right?
Hmm.
Like that, like how they're even like a little folder file, if you will, and you're getting the information that way, but you can kind of consume it, and you're not reading an entire paragraph of a page, and like, so what was the strategy for how you want to lay out the comic, like, you and Jed working on this? How was that kind of structure set up?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and it's the captions, we call them historical captions, the ones
Yeah.
you're talking about with the kind of the file card.
Yeah.
They're a really important component in this because I'll be honest, man, as much as people love Beef Bros and No One Left to Fight and Savage Hearts, Worst Dudes, all of my creator-owned stuff, the reception's always been great. And the people who actually buy these things, they adore them. They feel really passionate about them. But I've always been a little miffed that the line on me is, "Oh, Aubrey does such fun books. They look so
Mm,
good. The colors are great. They're like, he works with such great artists," which all these things are true,
right.
but they've always felt like backhanded compliments to me. And I'd been off shelves for a minute. I had a really big year in 2021, and since then I've been working. I've been up on my mountain working on Free Planet, figuring out the new thing because I wanted to make sure that my next book, there's so many variables we can't control. But which I think makes it all the more important to control the variables that you
Mhm.
can control that are in your power. And I knew that while I certainly couldn't dictate the macroeconomic state. If believe me, if I could, things would be a little bit different right now. Like, well, I certainly can't predict or control that.
Right.
What I can control is the work and how the work is presented. And I started from a place of wanting and not just wanting, needing to have the recognition I felt like I had been denied in
Mhm.
terms of doing intelligent, complex work. I think Beef Bros is a really good example in that it presents very silly and campy, but there's a lot of thought that went into
Right.
it, and it's more complex than, the political message is not complex. The political message is very straightforward, but the complexity comes in how it's presented and how the story itself is structured and how the pages are laid out and the approach that Tyrell and I took to the material. I started from a place with Free Planet of really wanting to demand that kind of
Mhm.
respect and recognition from people for my work. I wanted to be seen, and I want to be seen as an intelligent and even cerebral writer.
Mhm.
It's a thing that I've never been painted with that brush before. And I did, you know, all my books have theories, right? Like I treat them a little bit like doctoral theses, right?
Okay.
Like here's the theory and here's what I'm gonna do and like here's how I'm gonna approach this thing. And with Free Plan, I was like, okay, well, how do we make a smart book? How do we
Mhm.
make a book? Let me amend that. How do we make a book that's viewed as a smart book? Because
Mhm.
these are two different things, right? And so I
Yeah.
started looking around at other books that people, other books and creators that people rave about being, this is so smart, it's brilliant, it's what a smart writer. And almost to a one, the thing they all had in common was a lot of words on the page. A lot of words on the page. And I don't think that that makes a smart book.
Yeah.
And I've always avoided that. My work reads breezy. No one left to fight. There's not a single caption in it, I don't think. And that's normal for me because those are the comics that I traditionally like. And upon thinking about it and reading a little bit more broadly, I was looking at a really important moment for me. I was reading Lone Sloan by Philippe Trier, and it's relentlessly visual stuff. But he'll have these huge captions, just these massive paragraphs just plopped right down in the middle of things. But it's not a problem, A, because his prose is good,
Yeah.
and B, because it is in conversation with the page, right?
Yeah.
It feels like it's part of an overall visual presentation. And I think that a lot of comics, these like comics that get the smart comic accolades, the captions fall in one of two categories. One, they're either airsats word balloons, where it's just what somebody's thinking, which I
Mhm.
find not particularly challenging or interesting. Or two, they are descriptions of what you see on the page. It was dark and stormy night. The clouds were gathering. And I find that even less interesting. So the task for me became figuring out a way that I could actually use captions in a way that add to the book, right? As opposed to just being some kind of side unnecessary element, something that actually contributes to this overall visual presentation. And that there are two important components of that. And one is the approach of, all the captions in Free Planet are written by they're this Dr. Aldous Foyrushi. I have a name for him because he also writes all of the back matter at the end of every issue. It's a very specific voice
Mhm.
that I kind of there's a historian that I really like. His name is Hugh Thomas, and I try and kind of evoke his voice when I'm writing those things. It's very, very flowery, complex sentence structures with lots of big words, right? That's why I write them the
Yeah.
way I do. And so that was the first thing, right? Having a distinct voice. It's not one of the characters. It's not some kind of omniscient narrator. It's a person. There is a person writing these things with a specific point of view and maybe some biases of his own, right?
Yeah.
And that narrative is what what runs throughout the entire series is his telling you this kind of future history of what happened, but it is written in such a way, it's written in concert with the actual scenes you're seeing, right? Whether they're big military action or interpersonal drama, the captions serve to do one of a few things. Either, you know, provide additional context for what you're seeing, to provide a different point of view on what you're seeing, right? If you're a reader and you see an interaction between two characters, you think you know how you feel about it, but then you get some more context, some
Right.
historical context for what's going around, and maybe you have a different view on things. And then the third one, which is kind of the most exciting to me, is when what the captions are saying directly undercuts what's
Mhm.
happening in the scenes or what characters are saying. And so that's the first component of kind of making it all gel together. And
Yeah.
that that's kind of the theoretical framework for how we wove together all these. There are three elements, right? There's the geopolitical maneuvering, which happens in the captions and the graphs and charts and diagrams and all that stuff. And then there's the military action and the
Hmm.
interpersonal drama. And all three of those elements weave together. But none of that would be possible if I was working with someone less talented than the incredible Jed Doherty, because his page layouts are
Yeah.
why Free Planet sings. And in terms of process, we we developed a new approach. I did something I'd never done before, which, I'd done thumbnails for my books before, but typically after I script.
Okay.
For Free Planet, I thumbnail before I script, which is very unusual, right? And it's unusual because it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
I know what's going to be an issue, and then I draw all my little thumbnail, my little boxes, and I do little sketches of what's going to take place on every single spread.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I do that before I script is because it's something I've been caught, I'm certainly guilty of, and I think most comic book creators are. Um, Filler pages,
Mm.
right? Pages that exist to move pieces around, because comics, assembly line comics, right? And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean that in a factual,
Yeah.
descriptive way,
Yeah.
right? Uh, People and companies making assembly line comics need to do so in a way that is efficient.
Right.
And the most efficient way to make assembly line comics is for a writer to come up with a narrative, get signed off on it by a editor, and then take that narrative, break it into issues, pages, and panels. But the problem with that is your primary goal, not the creation of an art object.
Mm.
Your primary goal is the presentation of a story. So
Mhm.
sometimes you just have boring pages. You just have a
Oh, yeah.
page, it's like a 5 or 6 panel grid, and just people move around and different things happen in order that you can get to the splash later. And I find that insufficient. Our
Mm.
goal with Free Planet was to create something that works as literature and an art object. And to do that, the approach was necessary. And this is what, up on my mountain, man, trying to figure it out. This is this is what was handed down to me from the heavens, right? I got to start doing my thumbnails prior to scripting in order to ensure that every single time a reader turns the page, they are confronted by something overwhelming. They are confronted
Mm.
by something that it's exactly what you're talking about earlier, something that incentivizes them to spend some time with
Yeah.
the page and really appreciate it, because we've endeavored to layer this thing with literary depth,
Mm.
with complex themes, right? There are no answers. There are no straightforward answers. There's no propaganda. We're not telling you how things are. We're hoping to catalyze thought and rumination within our readers. And in order to do that, we need time. So we need to force people to slow down and really
Yeah.
dig into this stuff so they can find the complexity that lives within ambiguity. That's the goal. And it took doing thumbnails to accomplish it. And brother, if you think like I do, that Free Planet looks unlike anything else on the racks, which I stand by. I don't think there's another book like this.
Yeah.
I do not think there's one in existence that looks and feels and reads like Free Planet. That's why.
Yeah.
That's the reason why. Because we took an entirely different approach to it. And to be clear, I don't send my thumbnails to Jed. I don't. The
Okay.
first time he see,
Oh, okay.
I did a newsletter a few weeks back, in which I talked about this. I called it the approach. And I
Yeah.
talked about like how we made how we designed a page. And that was reading that newsletter was the first time Jed had ever seen my thumbnails. I kept them all. I do them because I like to compare them
Yeah.
against what he does. But Jed, I met Jed when he was working for Howard Chaykin. He was one of Chaikin's assistants. Jed does not, he's benefited from the harsh tutelage of my Uncle Howard. He does
Right.
not need me telling him how to lay out a page. And in most cases, he comes back with something better than I came up with anyways. But by virtue of
Mm,
doing it, it ensures that the script that I eventually write is being led by visual concerns.
yeah.
It's a design-led approach to
Yeah.
comics.
You're almost you're not telling Jed what to draw, but what you're doing is you're allowing yourself to say, okay, no matter what gets drawn, there's going to be purpose for why that's drawn on those pages because I've started that way and now I'm scripting off of that. And so then Jed will get to do what Jed does, but you're not like, oh, I want it to look like this.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's the important part is my taking the time to do it, not what I actually come up with, right? Because
Yeah.
Jed always comes up with something better. But by virtue of taking the time to actually do it prior to scripting, it ensures that we there are no filler pages
Right. One of the
in Free Planet. Every single page is designed to be self-sufficient. You
yeah.
know, it's every page, even if it's part of a larger scene, is is a art object and a little story, a little narrative in and of itself that can be appreciated in isolation. And I thought that was really important, man. I thought a lot about how I felt going through Dinotopia books when I was a kid,
Okay.
right? Which are not comics, but they're comics adjacent, I
Yeah.
think, right? Because it's text and it's pictures and it's designed to be just this overwhelming thing that you can flip it open to any page, any part of that book, and just get lost in it
Yeah.
immediately. And that's kind of that's the feeling we wanted to capture with Free Planet.
Oh, for sure. One of the things that I noticed too in the book, and I'm curious about kind of how this worked with, hearing your process there with Jed of the Freedom Guard. I think that's part of the thing that really does sing. You have these characters, these character designs. How much of like, how much conversation and like goes into it with Jed of like how these characters, how they're gonna act, how they're gonna look, how they're like, because you have like what eight very distinct different characters and I think that is also a very strong strength of the book of getting to see them and getting to see their backgrounds. And we get to experience and live with a little bit of each of them in the first issue, too.
Yeah, one of the fun things about working with Jed is you just keep discovering strengths.
Mm,
I've yet to discover something he can't do, and I've tried. I keep like throwing like, oh, this 70s French comics technique or this manga technique, and he nails it always. The character design, so Jed's actually posted on his Patreon a lot of the early design work, which
okay.
is really fun. It's really fun for me to go
Yeah.
back and look at because it's been a minute since we started working on this thing. And you know, it's Free Plant's a design-led book in a lot of ways, right? It's research-led, the extensive research that I've done into real-world revolutions and civil wars, and it's design-led both in terms of the design of the page as well as the design work that Jed has done, not just for the characters, but for spaceships and guns and vehicles and attire, the way different
Yeah.
societies and planets dress and weight their energy, and all of that stuff is fed back into the narrative. And I think that's an especially salient point with regard to the character designs, which is another area where Jed excels. We started, so I had this idea for Free Planet, and part of the idea was, it's space Venezuela. It's people on a satellite. They all have completely different political ideologies and they butt heads constantly,
Mhm.
right? That was the germ of the idea. And so to achieve that, right, to build the engine that can make
Yeah.
that possible, we needed the characters, we needed the cast, right? And so that was an early thing that we talked about. And I took archetypes from real world stuff as well as from sci-fi, like 60s, 70s prose sci-fi, and I smashed them together, right? So I sent Jed a list of, there's the robot, there is the big like, or there's the gorilla hero. There's the guy who might be a terrorist. There's the indigenous person who joined up with the revolution, right? I sent him like kind of all of these archetypes
Mhm.
to the alien, the two distinct religious figures, right? Who fight it out all the time. I sent him a list of these archetypes and then he got to work. And some of them he nailed immediately. Others we kind of had to tweak and kind of go back and forth on until it felt right to us. But all of them, all of the designs existed, all the character designs existed before the characters did. And I think that's really important. That's something I did for the first time on No One Left to Fight.
Mhm.
Uh, Fico and I were talking, and we had like a very rough idea for, it's Dragon Ball, right? They're
Right.
stand-ins for Goku, Vegeta, and Bulma. And we had ideas of you know, how we were going to change things, but we didn't really understand who these characters were yet, other than just ersatz versions of Dragon Ball characters. And Pico went and designed them. Pico went and drew them. And I think that seeing the characters really sparks for me as a writer a lot more understanding of who they are and how they act,
Mhm.
especially when you're working with as good artists as I've been fortunate enough to work with, because their work is so
Yeah.
expressive, right? And even in just an early design, if we see a Free Planet character kind of like doing a knowing or arrogant smirk, well, that clicks, right? It's like, oh, that's who this person is,
Yeah.
right? Um, did that answer the
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
So,
Good.
Aubrey, I feel like I could talk to you about comics in the process for hours, but I want to respect your time. What's one thing that you hope readers take away when they get to experience issue one?
I want people to be overwhelmed.
Okay.
Free Planet reads differently than other books. And when I've been doing podcasts and talking to retailers and stuff like that, and people who see early versions of the comics, one of the things that people say to me frequently, and I've heard it quite a bit, is at least it's one of two things, maybe both, right? Oh, I had to read it twice.
Yeah.
I read it once and I read it again because I feel like I missed stuff and I was right. Or, I started reading this before bed one night and I realized I'm not going to get through this. And so I spaced it out over the course of a week. That makes my heart sing
Mm.
because Free Planet, it's only 20 pages, right? Which for like an image book, especially a number one, that's pretty short, right? A
Yeah.
lot of these things launch at like 40 some pages or whatever. But Free Planet's dense.
Yeah.
And dense is a bad word in comics typically. So I try not to use it. I instead up Robert Kirkman called it rich, intricate storytelling or world building, rich, intricate world building. So I try to go with that. But it's
Ooh,
dense.
yeah.
There's just no getting around it. It's
Right.
part of the value proposition though. And even myself, when I'm reading lettering for the book, almost always I'll get a couple pages in and I'll be like, hold on. And I have to go back. I have to go to the beginning and start over and read it more slowly, because it's designed and paced differently than what is in vogue in
Yeah.
contemporary comics. And what I really hope people take away from it is that it is dense and it's rich and that there is a lot to be found there. This is not a book you grind through in 5 minutes, drop into the Mylar bag, and then file away. This is something you mull over,
Mm.
right? It's meant to be rewarding for people who actually dig into it, And I think that because of the way it's structured with Jed's amazing art, all the action. There's a huge military sci-fi action set piece in every issue. There is intense interpersonal drama in every issue. There's plenty of stuff there that if you were just looking at the art and reading the word balloons, you would get it, right? It it,
Right.
it would be a fulfilling comic. But my hope is that people spend a little bit more time with it, that they dig into the infographics, that they read the captions, that they think about it, that they you know, look at the way, that they think about the juxtaposition of the captions and the art. And because this is one of the things that so one of the things that's really exciting to me about our approach, inclusive of, like we do charts and graphs and infographics and maps, which isn't uncommon in comics.
Right.
What's different about Free Planet is that we work those things into the art themselves.
Mhm.
They're not interstitial pages. It's not back matter. It's part of the comic, which gets us two things. One, it incentivizes people to actually spend time with them as opposed to just like skipping it and maybe coming back later.
Mhm.
But more importantly, two, it provides an opportunity for thematic interplay, right? If you have a scene and you on a spread and then you read it, you have one takeaway. But then if you look at the charts and graphs accompanying it and read it, the Dr. Algis Foroshi future history, giving further context for that scene, maybe then you look at it in a different way. And I think that that is compelling, interesting, rich literary storytelling, right? Work that not just that doesn't just allow, but requires multiple points of view and multiple takes on it. Great novels are complex, right? Like our the very simplistic readings we were taught in high school to pass whatever SATs or whatever standardized testings notwithstanding, good novels reward study. Literature rewards study. Literature lives in ambiguity and complexity, and that's what I want to capture with Free Planet.
Well said. Well said. Aubrey, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me. It's been a delight.
This has been a treat, brother. Thank you for having
Yes.
me. I hope you'll bring me back sometime once we get a few more of these issues on the
Yes,
shelves.
I would love to unpack more. So, we will definitely have more conversations. Where can people follow along with you? Stay up to date with what you're working on, so they can check out Free Plant and know what else you're working on.
I'm on social media. I'm the only Aubrey Sitterson. I'm real easy to find. Just Google it. But where I'm most active is my newsletter. It goes out every single week, without fail. It's called I'm sorry. It's called Atlantis, like the sunken city. Atlantis Still Sunk.com. It'll take you right there to it, or just Google it. Just Google Aubrey Sitterson newsletter. You'll find it. It goes out every week. I've been doing deep dives into our extensive bibliography for Free Planet. So there's a lot of stuff you could go dig through there, find, the Spanish Civil War book I read. I just did one about Red Star over China, which is about the Chinese Civil War. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, gang, all the links will be in the description of this video if you're watching online or if you're listening via podcast. Click the description there so that way you can follow along, sign up for the newsletter. And if you're listening to this, go buy Free Planet at your
Go
comic
buy
book.
Free Planet, man.
Go
And get
get
the
it.
physical one. Do not
Yes.
do not get the digital. I mean, do it if you have to, but
But
this thing is designed to be read in print. It's
I
designed to be an art object.
I read it digitally, but and
I'm sorry.
I still wanted to talk to you about it, so it worked. But I can't wait to read it physically because I do think it's just going to be a whole different experience. So,
It's designed around spreads, and
yeah.
spreads don't work in digital comics. It's a book that you're meant to spend some time with. You're meant to
Mhm.
curl up on the couch with it and flip through it and look back and reread sections, and that's much easier in print and much more pleasant in print than it
Yes.
is digitally.
Yes. Well, gang, go sign up for the newsletter, get Free Planet. And Aubrey, thank you again so much for taking some time to talk about comics
It's
with
my
me.
pleasure, brother. Thank you.
No problem. With that being said, hopefully y'all can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out.